Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. This is a place where masculine identifying people come together in community to disrupt outdated models of masculinity and together construct new models for our way forward as men. As a special note, while this conversation is between men, this podcast values all beings and seeks to create positive impacts for all. I'm your host, Travis Stock. I am a master life coach, an equus coach, which means I often partner with horses when supporting clients, and I'm a teacher. In my coaching work, I am passionate about the balance of masculine and feminine energies in each of us, regardless of gender. I seek to help others nurture a relationship with both types of energy, which often leads to a greater sense of wholeness. And yet what I found in my work with men is that many of us have been taught messages about what it means to be a man by first teaching us to avoid anything that is associated with the feminine. That avoidance leads to few experiences of intimacy, emotions outside of anger, vulnerability, or even a sense of belonging. Striving to comply with these models of masculinity has many of us feeling isolated, ashamed, unworthy, afraid, angry, and depressed. That's why I started this podcast, to bring men together who are ready for something new, something more whole. Talking with my next guest on The New Masculine feels like a complete full circle moment for me. Back in 2015, I was gifted an astrology reading that in its completion expanded my awareness of self and what I would call the mission of my life. Through interpreting the patterns in the sky at the moment of my birth, this astrologer confirmed an inner knowing for me around the importance of masculinity work in my life. Little did we know 5 years later we would be jamming together on the podcast that I created that is dedicated to work around masculinity. Bill Attride identifies as an astrologer, as a seer, and as a transformer. He has provided astrological advice for over 30 years and hosts a radio show discussing current themes from an astrological perspective. His method is to blend metaphysical and psychological insights with the language of astrology to help guide individuals to greater fulfillment. Having him on The New Masculine provides a unique perspective that can help us better understand the overall shifts we are all experiencing, especially around masculinity and patriarchal systems. I'm super grateful that he has agreed to join me, and I'm sure his insights will help us navigate the intensity of our current times. So let's welcome Bill Attride to our conversation. Thanks for joining me, Bill.
Hey, good to see you, Travis.
It's great to have you here. As I was sort of alluding to in the intro that I wrote, this interview feels like a very full circle moment for me. Back in 2015, I don't know how much you remember of our reading together, but there was a moment in our reading where you were discussing some of the planetary alignments in my chart. And one of the things you had said to me is that none of the models of maleness and masculinity that are around me are going to work for me. When I look around, I'm going to see other models, but I'm going to be like, oh, that doesn't really work. And you had gone on to say that I was on my own path of trying to figure out my own model of what male identity or masculinity was. And I was at that time in 2015 really starting to put my website out as a life coach and starting to talk about what I was interested in. Wasn't quite brave enough to say that I was doing work around men and masculinity at that time, but that moment in that reading has stuck with me, and I've leaned against that moment and at times when I doubted myself or when I wasn't sure if I was following the right path of like, I knew that inside, and you sharing that with me just sort of confirmed that inner knowing. And so in moments of doubt, I was able to lean back on that and go, I think I'm still on the right track, even though my brain is telling me to turn around and go the other way. So I just thank you so much for that moment. It's a really powerful moment, and this feels so full circle, as I was saying.
Well, that's wonderful. As you might imagine, I hear this a lot. I often don't know what my impact of what I'm saying is, or where it's even coming from. Sometimes some of the most profound things I say to people, they'll say, you said this, and I go look at their chart and go, why did I tell them that? Where did it? But I know it's more. It's the chart, but it's more because it's the science and an art, and I'm very grateful to be able to practice it.
Yeah, I totally get that. Sometimes in my life coaching work with people, I'll be talking with them and I'll say something that seems so mundane to me, and yet they come to me a couple of years later saying, this really changed things for me. And I'm like, I don't even remember saying that actually.
Right.
Why that came out of my mouth, I don't know.
Well, I think it's common to maybe all human activity. We're inspired. Things come through us. and things align, and then it touches another and sparks something in them, and so on. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I really love that and value that aspect of being sort of, yes, I am the one saying some of these words, but sometimes that information is coming through me. It's not always my ego creating it. It is something that I'm co-creating with the universe, spirituality, oneness, source, whatever you believe in beyond yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that you think my guests should know about you as we jump into this conversation around masculinity?
Well, just that you mentioned of the radio show. The radio show came out having done the blog since about 2010 or 11. I had a book I'd been writing for a long time. I could never finish it. So decided to write a blog, some short essays, and then just it started flowing. And then I got the idea of let's do a radio show. So because I've been on a number of radio shows, let me go on and do a radio show, and it's been wonderful, And so it's just getting some of my thoughts and ideas out there, and just sharing what I've learned, and what I've studied with a larger audience, and it's been wonderful.
And I know that you sort of take a unique approach to your astrology readings, that it's not just astrology. You're looking with different sort of lenses and different perspectives. Can you share a little bit about that?
Right. I mean, I studied everything when I was growing up because I didn't know I wanted to know. And of course, it's in my chart. That's my nature. And so I come at it from, I mean, everybody brings to whatever they practice all their experiential knowledge and studies and what have you. So I studied anthropology and political theory and history and philosophy and then Jungian psychology. And then I stumbled into astrology and folded into that, studying metaphysical works, and especially being what I would call myself a theosophist, which is there is no religion higher than truth, and one studies all religions and all philosophies to see the common themes found over tens of thousands of years in human culture, or and so that's what I bring in what I call the ancient wisdom and fuse that in with astrology. And that's what a lot of my writing and my shows are all about. It's their truth was discovered long ago. There are truths, and we just have to keep on reframing them in a new fashion for the cultural moment we're in, but the truth doesn't change.
You are just taking in so much information as you're interpreting it and sharing with people, because I've done my own little exploration of astrology and learned to do a little very foundational kind of birth chart reading skills.
Uh-huh.
And there's just so much to keep track of just in all of that, let alone the truths of humanity over time.
Well, I like to start at the core because, understanding where we've come from, why we're here, where we're going, and then looking at an individual chart and seeing where is this person in their journey. And we can't say exactly, we just see what are the challenges they're faced with, which I see as the opportunities to grow in this lifetime, and what strengths that they bring in that they can lean into to help them master those challenges. And so move themselves forward on that path of awakening. That's the whole point. So an encounter like you had, anybody's encounter with a reading with the right kind of astrologer or the right person at the time should lead to some sort of quickening in their development. Because the universe is saying, this is who you are, go be that.
Yeah, and you came into my life right when, as you even said in my reading, that I was at a fork in the road, and I could feel that happening. And so it sort of gave me permission to explore what are the two different paths I could take.
Right.
It framed it up in a way that I was like, okay, so if I'm at a fork in the road, I can feel this sort of internal tension. But if I frame it as there's a choice to be made, what is the choice to be made?
Right.
And since then, my life has changed drastically.
Exactly. Sure. No. I mean, life evolves that way. And then there are these inflection points, these sort of breaks or schisms where you go one way or the other. And probably both paths are fine. But once you're on a path, that's going to be the direction and the feelings and motivations and everything that are guiding that path. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm really curious to know a little bit more about you as a person, especially around how it relates to our conversation around masculinity. So if you'd be willing to, would you share some of the stories that come to mind for you around what you learned about being a man in this world, either as a child or things that have changed your perspective? Like, what's your arc been around masculinity?
Um, I think like any child, you're immersed in this family, which is your family. So it seems like that's the way it's supposed to be until you start comparing to other families and saying, "Wow, mine is different." And I'm sure most people have that experience, but because I've yet to meet quote unquote a normal family in 40 years of talking to clients about their family life. But so it's a common thing. But we have these maybe archetypal sense of what a family should be. And it starts with mother, father, and brother, sister, and all that, and then other family relations. And you're trying to find your way in the world to meet your needs, and others are in charge with meeting those needs to start. And so you look to them for that as well as guidance in terms of how to be a human. And I was very fortunate that I had some pretty good role models in my mother and my father. They were unusual though. My father was English and first generation American. My mother had they married late because my father had married previously, and so he had a first family, and then his first wife died. And my mom had had a complete career before she married my dad, and she was a scientist, and so she married him in her late 30s and had me in her late at the end of her 30s, which was unusual at that time, and probably still to this day to some extent. And and their relationship to each other was one where he was the breadwinner, but she had had a career and she still remained independent and did her own things and volunteered and worked in the community. And they were, you could see them as a team working together, neither one being in charge or telling the other what to do, but taking turns at leading and doing. And my younger brother and I growing up, because our siblings had already left the home to go boarding school and college because they were much older, um, it was just he and I, and we were asked to, or we were expected to do our fair share. So we were brought up to set the table and clear the table and wash the dishes and do all these things. There was no sexual differentiation about what you do. It's everybody helping. And then I had my chores and weekend with my dad and spent time with him. So I'm by his side and watching how much care he takes in with his tools and doing the gardening and how carefully you work with the plants. And my mom, on the other hand, cooking and helping. And my brother goes off to the war in Vietnam, and she involves us in helping to cook and bake and make things to send to him while he's away for 13 months. And so they very much involved us in taking care of us, but also taking care to keep instilling in us the sense of responsibility and that you're here to contribute and you don't just get an allowance, you have your chores to do. you and so I was very grateful to have that and to be part of a church to start, to get a good foundation, go to choir and be at church twice a day on Sunday, and then come home and have a family dinner in the middle of the day because it was there very English. It was remarkable. And my dad taking time at night when he came home from work, he would sit with my brother and I and read us stories together and got us infused with this desire to read, which to this day I'm so grateful for. And my mom equally being very active and involved in helping us with our schoolwork and whatever. They were a team. And yet there was sexual differentiation. My dad did go to work. My mom did stay home. But she didn't stay passively at home. She was very involved in the community, a very loving person. And I had people constantly coming to me when I was a little older saying, when we moved in the neighborhood, your mom made it her business to help us find friends and make our friends and become part of the community. Your mom is a wonderful woman. I just kept getting in these messages about how special my dad was, how special my mom was. And I'm going, okay, but they're all I know. But I was very blessed and I know I am. And I'm very grateful for that. I played with boys in the neighborhood and we made it. Back then, there was no organized sports for the most part. We were young. We just went out for the day and made stuff up and just played and imagined and played games. And then you get to school and you get into sporting activities there and that's fine. But once I got into junior high and high school, and we're beginning to become more sexually aware at that point, I became much more drawn to being with women than with men, not sexually, but just in terms of their nature and their intellect and what they like to deal with. And I found the boys, maybe it was just the way they were being shaped and trained, becoming all about sports and all about, football and baseball and competitive sports. And I was like, it wasn't that important to me. And so I did like individual sports like cross country, and most of my friends ended up being female friends in high school, the ones that really mattered. And I didn't think anything that was odd about that. I really felt comfortable that way. And it sort of continued when I went to college. I was in college for just only the first semester before I had a girlfriend, and I was always with her and her friends. And it just became my normal to be more drawn to the feminine, as it were. But I didn't look at it as feminine in the sense, oh, I'm feminine. I thought myself very masculine. I was an athlete. I ran competitively. I was a cross country runner. I would run 10 miles a day. I'd gotten in karate, and I would do all these things. So I was into that male mode of physical exertion and performance and being alpha that way. But then in terms of interacting with people, I always was very gentle, in terms of my conduct in conversations and whatever, and tended to gravitate towards very intelligent women, that they sort of challenged me, just like my mom challenged my dad. I was drawn to that model of, I don't want someone who was just going to be drawn to me physically. I wanted someone. My first girlfriend and I, we spent most of our time in the library together studying.
Hmm.
Because we liked that. We were both brainiacs, and we had a lot. We had fun too. We partied, of course, at college, but it wasn't. It wasn't. I didn't join a fraternity. I didn't go to parties like that. I didn't care about, acting out and doing crazy things. It just wasn't me. And so then I come to New York for graduate school again, with a lot of, female people. In college, I joined after finishing my anthropology work, I went into a second degree in political theory and studied with this radical feminist professor. She was amazing. And I just saw this whole world of the masculine and the feminine, and how patriarchy had so distorted our culture for so many generations, for say many thousands of years, really, I guess, and how there were attempts now to rectify that once again. That it started in 15 and 1600s on to the present day. It was a long story, and the intersection that was constantly showing up in our country, the U.S., of rights for ethnic minorities, especially Black people, as well as women's rights and Black rights being fused as an ongoing struggle for equality in our country, just became part of the story that I was sort of working through. So I come to New York and start studying, and I studying really economics, but really history and philosophy. And I go as far as I can with that, and I realize, no, there's something missing. And so I take out the works of Carl Jung all by myself. I know how to study by that point because I've been all these seminars. I just read the first volume cover to cover, taking copious notes, having the most amazing dream life. And I just go through all 16 volumes. And at the same time, meet a woman who's an astrologer. And I go to her house and watch her do readings, and I begin pointing out things. And she gives me a book and says, here, go read this. And I just start reading everything in the field. There's a lot of treasures and there's a lot of garbage. And I got through it and figured out which ones I wanted to really hone in on, with no intention of being an astrologer. It was just, this is so exciting. And I began to realize, this is it. Everything I've done, everything I've studied is coming out through this vehicle. I began doing readings for friends, and they said, this is amazing. And so I just kept at it. And before I knew it, it took over my life. I mean, I had a day job for a while, but soon I realized this is going to be my path. And that was over, it's 40 years ago. And it's been amazing because I have been able to meet so many wonderful people, and some very troubled and challenging people too, of course. And my whole purpose is I'm here to help. I'm here to help a person experience in this way who they are. And if what I'm saying about them and relaying to them about what their chart says rings true, they're hard answers. They go, that's who I am. That's me. It doesn't surprise them. It doesn't shock them, but it's the universe, or at least our solar system, confirming, yes, you are who you are. Just go be that. And then, of course, it also provides this framing of the timing and unfoldment of that we are coming in with certain qualities and conditions, opportunities and challenges that we have bequeathed to ourselves, as I believe it. We've been all doing this a long time, and a chart really is sort of a map of a summation of all that we have worked upon and somewhat mastered and what still remains. And so it's a way of understanding. These are my instructions for my continuing my process of awakening to become fully human. And that's how I practice it. I don't practice it to predict things to people, though I can tell them this is the kind of year ahead that's going to make you focus more on your emotional development or more your intellectual development, or you're going to have to be very patient this year, but you'll get through it. But I try to say, why? What's it for? Don't just say, oh, after this, I can't move this year. I'll just wait. I say, no, you're being asked to pause in order to do this. And so it gives meaning to the moments that a person's going through and sees it as a logical process, hopefully, of their step by step moving towards a higher level of being.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing such a nice overview of your trajectory with that, and what you're saying at the end there of what are moments of our lives based on the sort of blueprint in
Right.
front of us. What are the themes that exist within those moments? And I think that was something that stuck with me from the reading that you and I did, was how, without knowing me, you were able to pinpoint often down to the month and the year of sort of big transformational moments in my life where you described the quality of it. And then I was able to go, oh, that's when I started going to grad school. Oh, that's when I moved out of my state of where I was born. Oh, here's where I had my very first
Right.
relationship, based on the qualities that you were describing. And so I just think that it's such a astrology sort of exploration is so fascinating to me, because in some ways you can kind of brush it off just as like horoscopes and kind of this little, like, the very thin surface layer of what many people know of astrology. But there's this whole layer of depth to it that keeps drawing me in and keeps pulling me towards it too, much like you were sharing about your experience too.
It is. If I thought it was what was in the monthly magazines or newspapers or whatever, one would read certain things about it and columns and advice or forecasts, I would say, no, that's entertainment and that's fine. And then there's some great writers out there and it's sometimes very compelling and moving, and that's great too. But the real stuff, this is the first science. As humans are down here looking around going, what the hell's going on down here? And they look for order. They looked up and saw this pageantry, this rhythm of sun and moon and stars and planets, and found patterns and began to see patterns and make connections. To me, it's reassuring because there's an order to the universe. And then some people could approach it and say, well, then everything's predetermined. It's all fatalistic. You're just being pinged and directed to do things. I say, no, these are energies, but depending upon your level of awareness, you have greater or lesser choice in what you're going to do in those moments. We determine the content. The pandemic wasn't created by the planets. We made that happen by choices we've been making for a long time. The thing is, things are going to happen at a certain time, but what's going to happen, that's on us. So that's why it's important to wake up and make more consciously aware decisions and content going forward.
Something I'm struck by as I was listening to you share about your trajectory was the sort of big important figures in your life that taught you what it is to be a man, what it is to be a human, what it is to be in relationship with others. Your most primary figures were willing to cross the gendered boundaries that we typically see in our lives. Your dad followed some of the gendered norms, but also broke a lot of the gendered norms and was an active part of your care and development of you and your siblings. And then your mom was quite a powerful female that had her own independent life separate from her her marriage and her children, that she had her own values and her own sort of career even before she had children. And then you were also sharing about your college professor that was an extreme sort of, not extreme, but that was a feminist. Key figures in your life were either powerful women or caring men, that they were blurring the line a little bit more than our culture usually gives
Right.
permission for.
And many of them encouraging, all of them encouraging for the most, I would say, self-critical awareness. Like, don't accept what is as what it should be. Like, both my mom and dad, encouraging questioning, encouraging discovery. The teacher, the feminist, like definitely saying it doesn't have to be this way. Look at how this culture came this way, and it doesn't have to be. And also by studying Native American culture and other cultures in the anthropology, I can just say, my gosh, there's so many different ways humans have done these things and assigning tasks and roles. It's much more fluid than we've been brought up to understand in a more limited way in one Western culture or American culture. And I realized it isn't destined. It isn't predetermined. We are so capable of changing and evolving and transforming.
Yeah. So you had a pretty solid foundation in the adults in your life who were sort of raising you and
Right.
teaching you. And you had this which gave you a sense of, it sounds to me like you were pretty self-assured around your connections to women more than men, and what you were interested in, where you found yourself drawn to spending your time and energy. Did you have any pushback from your peers, from men around you, for following that kind of a trajectory?
I mean, I had some incidences in school, like in high school, where the typical thing, someone would challenge you to a fight, and everybody's expecting you, oh, you're going to have to fight this guy now because he challenged you. And I was like, I don't have to fight him. I just didn't go to the fight. And there was no consequence of that. It was like, I just took the smarter path. I knew this was in the end, I knew this was a very troubled person, came from a broken home, and he was just full of anger. And he was just picking on people to have fights. He was having fights every day with people. And I was the next one he chose to have a fight with. And so I could have been afraid of shaming their part. I'm sure at the time I was worried. Will I go back to school the next day and everybody's going to give me grief because I didn't show up? But nothing happened. It could have gone the other way. I could have been harassed.
It goes the other way for a lot of other men.
Like, come on, you got to fight. And I was big, so it wasn't like I got a lot of, people just wouldn't think they could mess with me, I suppose. And I wasn't trying to cause trouble. But I could stand up for myself. But I was, at times I saw troubled men. That's the thing. Both men and women we're all works in progress, and especially, and coming out of our homes, and some coming from very difficult and damaged homes. My next door neighbor, his older sister had polio, and the family focused on the polio child, and the two younger sons were sort of not given guidance, and they became wild children. And they were fun to be around, and we had some fun as children, but they also they were not fully formed morally. So I'm coming home one day and I see one of the kids coming out of our house. He's been breaking and stealing from our own house. I mean, like, and you feel like, I knew why it happened, but I also was pretty angry about it happening. But nothing I could do about it, except that then that person was caught doing that and was banished from the state. Literally, the parents had to remove him and send him away to live with other relatives because he was repeatedly doing this. So I didn't take it personally. I More often than not, when I counted that, I felt sorry and compassion for the person. I mean, part of me was angry, but I'm not angry that I'm going to go hit him or something. I mean, with my brother, we were always fighting, but like his brothers, and he would always tease me,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd let him tease me for a while, and finally, then I'd say, stop it, and I hit him, right? And he'd wait till mom or dad came home, and then he'd start crying, maybe hours later.
Then I'm the baby brother. I know that skill very well.
I was always punished. And I finally woke up one day and realized there's no way to stop this. I told him, no matter what you do, I'm not going to hit you. So he began hitting me for a while to see if this would work. And eventually he gave up. So we broke the cycle. But, I was stuck in that loop for a while, because he knew how to do it and I was how to get, that's what kids do. You're learning how to action, reaction, and provoking and evoking, but it didn't damage me. It was just like a phase of growing up and realizing. I think it's when I realized patterns are patterns and they're self-reinforcing. And I realized I didn't know. I didn't know what was going to happen. I just told them, my brother's name's Robert. Robert, I'm never going to hit you again. It took him a while, but eventually he stopped hitting me, and we were good.
Mm.
so so
Mm.
I realized then I realized that's why I always talk about my clients, that we're stuck in these patterns of action reaction, and even though we know it's not good, it's so familiar we just stay with them in very dysfunctional arrangements with loved ones and friends and whatever. But we can change them. Someone has to change it and wake up and say no more. I'm not going to react that way. I'm going to choose a different response. That was an awakening for me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you talked about that because I think that we're watching so many of those patterns play out as a culture right now in the United States, even as on a global human race around this action and reaction back and forth and the constant spinning and these looping and these patterns that end up being quite destructive. And so how were you able to move through that and actually have that enlightening experience? Like what was your process like for that?
I don't remember how it occurred. It just struck me that I just made the choice. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to fall for it. I think I got to the point realizing, wait a minute, we're just being automatons here. He provokes me, I hit, and then I'm punished. And I just said, I'm not gonna let it happen. Um, and it was so liberating. And I think, but you're right, in terms of individuals and groups and larger communities and cultures, these energy forms that are just driving the story, people get caught up in these thought and feeling forms that have a life of their own and will keep continuing to evoke individuals and groups and masses of people into these clashes or whatever they're doing until enough people or a critical number of people or a leader wakes up and breaks the pattern.
Mm.
And then we have a breakthrough and the thing dissipates. But we're certainly caught up in, I call them, I'm writing about it now actually for my next show on next Sunday I talked about Pluto and the will, and now I'm talking about Neptune and these very energy forms of belief and understanding and how we view the world. And no matter what level we're viewing the world at, we all have to realize we're all living in a world of illusion.
Mm.
Because none of us have the power of the divine to see everything and all and encompass it all. If we were to see it, even for an instant, it would look just like chaos to us to see
Mm.
the all. So we all have to grab just a little piece of it and say, this is real, everything else is not real. And depending upon that bubble we exist in within our family, community, nation, and then the world, we're all these bubbles of reality intersect each other like Venn diagrams. And so we share a lot with certain people, but don't share with other people, depending upon sexuality and race and culturals. And so there's all these intersecting sensibilities that create my own individual sensibility. And then once we're awakened and becoming more conscious about these things, we can begin to sort of disassociate from certain bubbles that we realize are illusionary or more limited, but also realize that others are caught in it. And while they're caught in it, we can't reach them. That's their reality. And so we can't force a person to see the truth. We have to elicit it through experiences that they go through and we go through, and hopefully catch them at that right moment when they go, ah, and they can let it go. And they will, some or most will. But we're going through it's amazing how that process of creating these energy, mind, emotional bubbles has proliferated now with social media and,
Yeah.
and everything. And like all these memes just going out there and people just getting caught up, and it's pushing everybody's buttons,
Mhm.
and people aren't thinking. They're reacting. They're not making conscious choices. They're being pushed and prodded in very powerful but very deeply unconscious and subconscious ways. It's an amazing thing to watch if you're an alien coming from another planet going, wow, look at this. But for
Mhm.
us who are caught in all these bubble waves and it's like, how do we untangle this mess? How do we get back to, and that's why I always in my work try to focus on the fundamental truths. If you stick to the fundamentals that have been passed down in all religions, in all philosophies, in all metaphysical systems, truth was found long ago. Just go back, and try to stick to those straight and narrow principles, and you won't get so pulled into the chaos and confusion that's driving so many right now. That's the way to say find something to be centered in, certain fundamental, truths that have always been there, and that's what keeps me sane. That's why, I believe, I have this firm belief it's all going to be good in the end, but the end is a long ways away, and getting there, we have a lot to do to make this world a better place.
I so appreciate the framework you've offered around sort of that each one of us is just grabbing a little chunk of reality and saying, okay, no, this is real. It's like us making sense of the chaos. And each one of us has our own sort of unique perspective on that based on our life experiences.
Right.
And I was just actually having a conversation with my brother yesterday around, he was confronting somebody that had very different beliefs than he does. And we were talking about this whole concept of that oftentimes logic isn't what's going to get through to someone, because these are not logical decisions that people are making in logical belief systems. They're very emotion based, and they're based on my sense of control over reality of the potential unknown and chaos that the world is, that just all is.
Right.
And to confront people on their belief system actually goes so far into making it, if they had to look at it a different way, it would fracture their sense of reality and control. And right. So it's beyond just a logical belief system that can be changed quite easily. It's a full belief and ownership of our reality that's fractured in those moments.
Right. And so we have to sort of always, we try to find the commonalities. What common beliefs do we hold to in terms of what we're here for, how we should conduct ourselves and all that, and build from that, and then begin to see where it begins to fracture off of that in terms of, well, no, this is what's happening. Well, why do you think that's happening? And so it's, obviously what drives a lot of it for many people in the negative is the fear, that there's somebody who's really controlling things, or there's nobody controlling things, or whatever the fear comes from, and trying to make themselves feel somewhat safe or comfortable in that. They will hold on to anything and anyone to give themselves that sense of security or safety. So yeah, you can't take that away. You have to show them there is a better way, there's a truer way, there's a more secure way. And let's look at this. But it's, like when clients come to me, I never disturb them. I've had clients come who are devoutly, let's say, religious, let's just say Christian. And in the Bible, there are passages where, like basically they say, kill all the astrologers. They're just, basically, like in Shakespeare, kill all the lawyers. That's the first thing we do. No, because they're just, they're false. They're just using their skill to deceive people and take their money and whatever. And I agree, those aren't the people who should be watched or followed. But so if a person comes in, they've come to be been sent by somebody, and they go, I don't believe in astrology. This is just bad. And I go, okay. And I do their reading, and we finish after the hour and a half for a session. They go, well, I don't know what you're doing, but I believe in what you're doing. He go, but it's not astrology. I go, whatever, okay, because I've had that, and I've had people who are, too credulous. They want the chart to tell them what to do. And I say, no, it's here to guide you, but you have to make your own decisions. You have to learn through trial and error what to do and what not to do. And you can't use the chart to say, should I go outside today? Will I meet my love today? I say, you'll meet your love when you're ready to meet your love. And that's on you. Your chart can't predict that. And people who want a predicted life don't want to hear that.
I think that was one of the questions I asked you during my reading was, when am I going to be in love with someone? When is that coming into my life? Tell me now, Bill.
I know. And sometimes it's clear that the opportunity is presenting itself. But the question remains for the person, do you understand that what's going to happen out there is totally rely upon what you've done in here? to make your way to the encounter. That's what matters, not what the chart says.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think what you're pointing out is that astrology isn't quite as predictive as many of us would like it to be, and set rules for things that some of us would really like.
Yeah.
But I also hear you talking about some fundamental truths that have existed across time and existed across cultures and religions and belief systems. Are you able to sort of point to any of what some of those might be? I'm sure there are many, but some that come to mind for you?
Well, I mean, throughout history, different systems have developed, and it was kind of in terms of astrology. One of the things, the planets move around at different speeds, and they all line up with each other, but it never is exactly the same because they're all at different speeds and different times. These alignments occur, but when the three outer planets all line up together, it's a very special moment. It doesn't happen too often, like thousands of years apart. The last time it happened was in the 600s, 500s, which is when we had, Buddha and Pythagoras and Zoroaster and Lao-Tzu, all the teachers came at once in a great seeding of truth. And many of those truths persist to this day. And I like to say that almost all the teachers I can think of, I would say all, just my nature, they all came in to restate the truth for the humans at that time, because teachers are sent forth to restate these are the truths, these are the beliefs that have held and will always hold. Because truth is out there in the universe, but it's in each of us also. We're built of truth. That's how we can find and discover the truth, seeing it reflected in the stars or in one another's eyes or in whatever. Truth is everywhere. So the teachers come, but then after the teacher's gone, lesser people turn it into a religion. And then over time, it becomes more and more encrusted with cultural and ethnic and other incrustations that the truth is hard to find, but it's still there at the core if you get to the esoteric core of it. But in terms of practice and methodology, I mean, one could argue Jesus' whole teaching was love, and just pure love and women were big in the church in the beginning. And then men come along a little and say, whoa, no, we're going to take over now. And they banish women, banish the feminine, which wasn't part of the teaching, but it becomes the doctrine. Okay. And it's true of every religion. They go down this path. That's why teachers have to keep coming out to say, no, it's about love. I mean, that's the most important message, is that we're all part of one great creation. And if we hurt anything or anyone, we are on the path, and we are hurting ourselves. We're on the path of hurting ourselves. So we're all here to do no harm. We're all here to love and create and build, not to destroy. And it's been the teaching found in all religions. Now, some take a spiritual path like the Buddha, saying, okay, what's pain caused by? Attachment. So we taught, let go. Don't be attached to this physical form. You're in a mortal body. You will die. It will cause you pain if you hold on. But also to everything in the world. Everything is mortal. Everything will pass. So enjoy the dance of life. Enjoy moving through these forms. Let them go and move from form to form, and your life will be beautiful and gentle. But when you get attached and try to control and try to possess, pain. So that's the universe. I mean, so all these teachings they are similar, and come in a time that's appropriate for that civilization or culture when it needs the next infusion. One would think we need one right now.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would say that this element you're talking about around this truth around do no harm, and that we're all a part of a collective, that's been missing for a really long time.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing little sparks of that coming through, and people trying to have conversations about the long-term consequences of our actions and behaviors in terms of climate crisis, in terms of racial injustice, in terms of misogyny, in terms of the Me Too movement coming forward. We're getting to really see sparks of a more collective mindset and a more empathetic and connected sense of being with each other.
Right.
But there's also a lot of pushback from more sort of patriarchal systems that are trying to maintain their sense of power and individualism.
Yes. And that has been part of the toxicity that's been causing all the damage on the planet. And it's not that being in a matriarchy would have prevented that, because it had gone another way in terms of it being dominant and controlling equally. It's the imbalance between the masculine and feminine. They're not flowing through each other, into each other, and men being fully feminized and women being fully masculine, in whatever way they would be, because I see the range of people I come with, very feminine men to very masculine and everything in between. Um, and yet in its extremes, when certain groups or leadership positions in certain cultural types get going, and it becomes about power and control and hierarchy, in this male sense, using all the male power for negative ends, for power and control and domination, not what it's supposed to be for. I mean, the strength of a man, the firmness of a man, the loyalty of a man would be loyal not to a person, but to the principle of love and truth and honor. So you can take any of these qualities and say, oh, that's true, but then it gets twisted to serving a negative path. Just like you could have a person bringing out those so-called softer qualities of the feminine that could lead to a culture that was just not very strong, So it's like, what are we doing here? Well, these are energies in all of us that we need to know when to stand up and when to yield. And it's a delicate thing in each situation to be more firm with somebody and realizing, no, if I be firm here, I'm going to break them. So I got to pull back. And I do that in my work. I only can say so much at a session to anybody, because if I laid it all out, I don't know what they've actually gone through. I can see charts where a person's faced abuse and damage of perhaps a horrific form, but I don't know. I'll just say to them, your space was violated, and let them come back to see what they might want to talk about. And sometimes people start telling me stories like, I was violated as a child by whatever, and I've never told anybody, because they needed someone to acknowledge it, but in a gentle way, so they could feel comfortable in telling their story. I mean, that's really what you and I do, and many people do. We're all telling stories. We're all listening to stories, because that's how we do the work.
Yeah.
That's how humans become human. We tell each other stories and share information, inspire one another, and we're just passing on the same stories. It's like we're not originators of the story. It's like how we passed on knowledge and wisdom for thousands of years was just the storytellers. And then we began writing it down, which changed our minds and altered how we think and communicate, and language became very defined and definite. And now it's becoming more fluid again in this world of visual and whatever, and it's changing our minds and how we're interacting with our technology. It's remarkable how plastic we are, and how our sense of consciousness and time and space and our language and communication forms changes us.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating how plastic we are, and yet how rigid we are at the same time.
Exactly. No, exactly. It's like, of course, there's, and then we just can't be like an amoeba, like just floating around. And we have defined space, and we have definite needs, and everybody's needs should be met. And of course, they've been very unequally met, and in gross ways, in terms of disproportional sharing of the so-called wealth of the world. And I just keep on always writing about the wealth for humanity are the people. And how are we taking care of our people is a signal of how well we understand true value in this world. And by many measures, we've been doing very poorly in our country and other countries in making it possible for each human to reach their fullest level in that time of self-realization. Because by doing that, we can solve all the problems. We won't have the problems. But it's by concentrating and allocating power into very few hands and cutting ourselves off from the greater richness of human self-fulfillment. That's why we're in the mess we're in.
Yeah, that's so true. And I love what you said around the concept of the wealth of a society is in its people, and not in the way that we're currently doing it. Like, in some ways, our current post-industrial model is to make the humans, the people, a product and to make money off of and to sell data and to continue to create wealth for a society by taking from the people rather than by giving space and the resources and the wellness for everyone to thrive and to reach their potential, as you were saying.
Right. There's this hope that as we move into the post-industrial and we move into a sustainable world where energy is unlimited because we don't have to dig it up from a piece of mineral and make energy. It's always there and available. No one's cut off from energy, and we have sustainable ways of meeting our needs for food and shelter and clothing, that humans will be freed in their creative spirit to just be more, many people just to be creators of art and beauty and loving experiences and further discoveries about themselves and the world. The struggle for survival, which has been seemingly the theme forever, which wasn't the theme. If you look at hunter and gatherer societies and how they exist, the Bushmen and the Kalahari still and a few others, anthropologists noted, and to this day they note how those people have a lot of free time on them. A lot more than we people. With all our modern devices and washing machines and dryers and everything, we would think, oh my God, we have the most free time to do whatever. They have all this time.
Yeah.
To dream and think and create. We really haven't come so far.
Yeah.
We actually could make the argument that 10,000 years ago or 12,000 years ago, when we settled down into sedentary life with pastoral and agricultural life, that's when we took the wrong turn.
Yeah. Yeah.
that fork in the road, we took, not that it's the wrong fork, it's the fork we took. And it did creates what we know as civilization and the arts and literature and movies and all the stuff we enjoy nowadays. But the price we paid is enormous.
Absolutely. Yeah, I see that truth. Even I do a version of coaching that involves horses. And so I get to take people out and do experiential learning with a being that exists within community, but doesn't view power the same way that we do. Yeah. And so I get to see a prey animal, and yet they don't spend all of their life trying to survive in anxiety and trying to figure out ways to succeed and be okay and rise up in the power. They exist for the most part in stillness, in very open perspectives, and their needs are met. They move along to graze in different areas. They have sex when they want to. They tend to the young when they need to. There are dynamics that play out within their communities, and yet they often are so much more in stillness and open focus. They're not so hyper focused and hyper vigilant about things, and yet it can be misconstrued that prey animals are always like looking around for their survival and their safety. And so we see that even in the natural world and in other forms of community, that coming back to a collective sense of well-being actually could be a very supportive and nurturing thing that could help us a lot.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So as one of the words you sort of called out is this idea of balance, that we all have this masculine and feminine energy within each of us, but we also have them in collections of peoples and communities in cultures in this world. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the imbalances we're feeling and noticing, and that are we're very acutely aware of right now, and sort of where astrology is saying we're headed. What is the phase we're in, and where are we headed into?
Right. I mean, again, there's always cycles within cycles, and it's trying to figure out what was this moment versus that moment, and what were the influences that sort of give us a sense of why that is so. And you could step back and look at it very big or more narrowly, and more looking not just at thousands of years or just centuries or just decades, depending upon your model. But I would sort of say that this march through time in what we know is our Western world, let's stay with that, and not try to make it so global, but it still affects the globe since it's become a dominant cultural mapping for many other cultures now too, given pulled into this industrial and post-industrial world and all that it creates from that. That we've gone into this model where humans were becoming ever more divided from that sense of community, and that sense of competitive spiritedness was breaking down all the systems that maintain community, whether they be religious or society based in terms of people working together to maintain the commons that they held in common land and all these things that were activities that they depended upon for their well-being and foodstuffs or their what have you that have been removed. And so there's less and less communal and community and more just pure individual and fragmented, even families, no longer large families, but just very narrow groupings of people. And so it's gotten to the point where it's so toxic that we have to be at a tipping point. We seemingly are at a tipping point.
Well, yeah, look what the coronavirus has done to us. We're even more separate than before, and we're not even going to work to be in community at a work environment. We're just in our homes.
Right, and just losing that, people talk about how much they're missing, and they realize, wow, by being shown what it's like when you go down the path of totally being isolated, what it does to a soul. I mean, what it does, like people being put in in solitary confinement in prison. I mean, how damaging we realize that is. And so
there's a reason why that's the biggest punishment we give to people is we're not meant to be isolated.
No, and it's just torture. So there is this sense that looking at the development of human consciousness serially over thousands of years, we've been developing more and more this refined, very intellectual, egoic consciousness that separates us out from other consciousnesses. But there's a sense that there's a dawning of a new age coming, which could and would of necessity lead to the beginning of a reestablishment or re-energizing the communal nature that is part of our nature in terms of various activities where people get together to help one another meet the needs of the moment locally in local areas, towns and then regions and just building on that to solve their problems. And people are still doing that to this day, but it's going to be even bigger because we now have so impacted the world that if we don't make very great changes in energy and food and everything else, much of humanity is at risk, and certainly many life forms are at risk, and we're going to live in a very much less bright, less colorful, less diverse, less sustainable world in the not too distant future. So facing that possibility, I think there's a consciousness coming into being that says we have to start thinking both in terms of our local area, but always keeping in mind the global picture and how we can all live on this world sustainably. And the astrologers have a name for this. It's the age of Aquarius is coming. We've gone to the nth degree in terms of the development of the ego and the separate individualized self. And now as a counteracting force, we're going to begin moving beyond egoic consciousness to a more human collective consciousness once again. But having gone through that individualizing consciousness, we still retain that. So we don't go back into communal culture where we just lose our individual identities. They are celebrated as part of the communal, but it's sort of held in this more communal understanding of what is right practice and right conduct with yourself and your others in your life and with the world. That's what's dawning. That's what's happening. I mean, there have been hints of that with the UN, but it was basically just like still trying to get these nations to get along. We realize most problems transcend these artificial borders we've created. And so we're going to go to this hopefully next sense of acting as earthlings, as opposed to being, Americans or Russians or whatever. We're all of Earth, and we need to take care of our Mother Earth as she could take care of us and take care of one another. We're going to have to make sacrifices for and to one another to do that. But that's what the word means. Sacrifice means to make sacred. We give up our lesser consciousness, our lesser individual will to serve the greater good for one and all. And that's the only path we can take that will take us and continue on a developmental path that's meaningful and spiritual. The other path we don't want to even consider in terms of certain groups splitting off and trying to keep going and controlling power and destroying the planet as a result.
Yeah, I love that definition of sacrifice, of to make sacred, because I think so much of the conflict that's going on in the US culture right now is around feeling like I'm going to have to lose my sense of power, my financial well-being for others to be empowered. There's like
Right.
it's more scarcity mindset. It's like there's only finite number of resources, and yet I think in sacrifice in the way you're talking about it to make sacred, it is more of a there's more to gain. It's not a subtractive element. While there is this initial like letting go of something,
Hmm.
there is actually more that comes as a reward, as a benefit from that sacrifice.
Right. And it's again getting back to people. They're the value. Invest in them, support them so they can flourish and we can solve our problems. It's not about the material. We took that path. That's another path that's ending. More physical things will not make us happy. Better living will make us happy because we're all becoming more fulfilled in a fuller range of our capabilities than just pleasures or amusements or whatever it was. The problem is, of course, some people who are against moving down this path felt they never got the benefit. They never got theirs. They didn't have those pleasures, or they had them and they lost them and they want it back again because they were hurt by the various economic shocks we've gone through here that made many people look back to a better time and they look ahead to a worse time as far as they can tell. And if we can let them understand that, yes, it's going to be tough ahead, but your children and your children's children and the children all to come will have a better and better and better life. That's why we're being asked to do this now. We're all going to have to do this now. Otherwise, they won't have a future. You can't steal from their future anymore. And yes, maybe you didn't steal from their future. Other people earlier on and present day, people who are still doing quite well, they are stealing the future, but that's what has to change.
Yeah, I think that sort of looking forward a little bit beyond just what's right in front of you and your immediate needs is a theme I hear you talking about. It's what your enlightened perspective around that conflict you were having with your brother, and how you were like, "Oh, I see this loop. If I hit him, then he goes to mom and dad, then I get punished. Oh, so if I look one or two steps beyond what I'm typically looking at, I actually see where the loop creates a negative impact on me."
Right.
And I think that's what we as people need to do. And I think I want to encourage men to really be looking at that it'd be very easy in this time frame right now where things feel really intense, feel really scary, often very quite emotionally painful experiences that we're going through, to just look at the immediate needs right in front of us, to say, I need to gather mine, I need to hoard my,
Yeah.
and make sure that I'm okay right now. But we got to stretch our ability to look a little few steps further down the line to see how is this actually going to impact us long term, and impact our children, and impact humanity as as it exists.
Exactly. No. Right. If we see these signs of how the world's changing and becoming greater variations and the normal boundaries and norms are being broken every year, and we realize if that keeps going, there's a huge band of the earth in the not too distant future, which becomes literally uninhabitable as humans are constructed to survive in certain ranges of temperature and water and whatever. There's a huge band that will be totally gone. Where'd all the people go? And then others are even more marginalized still, but that we have to face the facts, but take responsibility. We did this, which is the good news is if we change, we can change this, but we can't wait. We're the ones who woke up and realized this. We were the ones who left the planet, looked back and said, wow, look at that.
Yeah.
That was a consciousness raising event to see finally for our own eyes, because we don't believe it until we see it. you know, you don't believe there's a hurricane coming to you, in it, and oh
Mm-hmm.
my God, this is a bad. So we need that experiential blow, as it were, to wake us up out of our dream state and go, wow. And from all that, Earth Day and ecology all sprung up in terms of people saying, this is real. We only got this little beautiful blue ball in the inky vastness of space. That's it, folks. And if it's becoming untenable, given how we've treated it by our massive release of all this energy all at once, and meanwhile we have this energy just staring us in the face from the beginning of time, and other natural forces that we could use for very, very no impact on the ecology, and the environment. Let's get there. We're aware enough. Can we do this? And I'm a hopeful person. I believe we can,
Yeah.
but I know the time is very short.
I wish we could give everybody that perspective of being able to leave Earth and go out to space just enough to look at the Earth. I think that you're so right that is a game changer in terms of seeing it from that height, seeing it from that distance. Gives you a different perspective on how you treat that little blue dot.
It looks beautiful, but it also reminds you, oh my God, it's so small in the vastness.
In the vastness.
Yeah.
For sure. So we know things kind of move through cycles throughout human existence, throughout the world, throughout patterns. When is the last time we were in we as a human race were in sort of this kind of cycle that we're heading into, this age of Aquarius that you mentioned?
Well, it's the age of Aquarius, for several different reasons. One is the precession of the equinoxes, which takes 24,000 years, 2,000 years roughly per sign. That brings us from Pisces now to Aquarius. Another signal of that is this repeating alignments of the planets Jupiter and Saturn, and they have a pattern of aligning in the elements. There's the fire, earth, air, water elements that astrologers divide the signs into under this energy forms. And we've been in an age of Earth for 200 years. And here in December 2020, Jupiter catches up to Saturn once again every 20 years. But this time they begin to align in the sign of air. And the sign they're aligning in to start with is Aquarius. And so many astrologers, some, not all, are saying this may be the dawning, or this is another mark of the dawn. And the last time this happened was back in the 1200s, which was another time of a great resurgence of thought and ideas. The materializing ages, which is the one we're coming out of, often are marked by a focus on the material and productive growth and development in a materialistic way. But now we're moving into an age governed by reason and thought and better understanding. Is the argument. That's what we're moving to. And that's why I say we're moving into this age where we now govern the planet not materially and trying to get our slice of it, but we move to a more ethereal plane where we're looking at the planet holistically and one another in this more consciously aware state.
I'm here for that.
Yeah, me too. No, me
Sign
too.
me up for that, because this phase that we're in, the transformational tension that we are experiencing is pretty intense and excruciating at times.
No, it is. It is. Again, I always say to myself, it didn't have to be this way. It's a series of choices humans made. Some they didn't know they were making, of course, and didn't know the consequences. But now that we see the consequences, it's what are you going to choose today? But understand that what is here today wasn't fated, as far as I'm concerned. But now, given what we chose, this is what we are. This is our fate.
We've sealed the
fate. we've made our own fate.
Yeah.
But the good news is we can unmake it too.
So, as a part of showing up for unmaking that, as a part of showing up for this new era that we're heading into, is there one piece of advice that you would give to men or anybody that's listening to this podcast around how do we engage with it?
I think the most important thing, which is what we've done since we woke up, when we began to vocalize and communicate and share with one another, where there was some berries in a bush or where there was an apple in a tree, or we helped each other locate and find ourselves in the world and understand one another, is we just have to be clear and careful in how we transmit our thoughts or ideas to one another, and very careful in listening to one another, and not react in a way without taking consideration that we shouldn't overreact. If someone says something that really is like a trigger for us, we need to control ourselves and say, wait a minute, I'm being triggered here. and maybe this person didn't mean this, or if they did mean this, I should understand that maybe they come with a what I consider to be less of an understanding. And if I just attack back, we're getting nowhere. So how can I not contribute to the negative and going down the wrong path? How can I be someone who can change it into the positive? I always use this analogy that life's like going through a series of doors, and there's always somebody going through the door ahead of you. So you're coming to the door. There goes somebody to the door. They're angry. They're upset. They're whatever, and they slam the door in your face. Now you're going to the door. You have a choice. It's easy just to slam the door in the next person's face. Just pass on the pain, which has been passed on maybe for millions of years or thousands of years, and the energy doesn't change. Or with a little more presence of mind and being centered in your heart, you hold the door open and you change the world. And all those little acts and being in small ways, that's how we change the world.
I appreciate that. That really sticks with me when you say centering in the heart. I
Yeah,
think that's what so many of us need to do. We need to make some more connections between our brain and our heart. We need to let the channel of communication move more fluidly because our ego and mind like to control and separate
right.
and gain power.
Yeah,
But
and that's what they're made for. And
yeah,
the intellectualized mind individualizes and separates us out, and the heart holds us together in this common
yes.
sense of feeling and affection and nurturing towards one another. Yeah,
And that feels like the perfect balance of masculine and feminine, the mind being very masculine and the heart being very feminine. And if you can allow them to work in tandem together, it creates that balance we were talking about earlier.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, well, thank you so much. This has been such a joy to have you. I so appreciate the confirmation you gave me many years ago around this work, and I appreciate you showing up again to be a part of the journey that I'm creating around this masculinity work.
Oh, I was my pleasure. This was a lot of fun. I'd do it again. So
Well, as we're continue to move through this tipping point that we're talking about, we will definitely probably have more to talk about for
that'd
sure.
be great. That'd be great. Yeah.
So, if people wanted to get in contact with you, if they wanted to book a session with you, or they wanted to listen to your radio program, how do they do all of that?
Sure. Well, given social media and how it propagates, if they just Google my name, Bill Attride, Billattride, my blogs will show up. I've got two mirrored blogs, and the radio show will show up, and they can just go and the radio show is also podcasts on Apple and the Blog Talk Radio platform. They can just always listen to it and get a sense of what I'm talking about and my approach from that, or read the blogs, which have often the same. I often do transcripts of the shows, not always, but of the main part of the show. I always open the show up and do like a 10 to 30-minute talk, and then I open up to people calling in with questions. I always say, if you want to talk about the topic, that's great. To this day, everybody calls to talk about their chart, which is fine. But then I go do like little mini readings, and it's wonderful, and I get to meet all these people virtually, and they get to see me working the way I do. So that
Mm.
it's fine. And if they want to directly reach me, the easiest way is through email. It's my name, Bill Attride @gmail.com. And I'd send them a little summary of my service, because I don't have a website promoting myself. That's one thing that I've never done. It's all been by word of mouth, and I never put up a website with all my services and stuff. I just have the blogs and the radio show, but I don't promote because I never needed to, and I don't.
That's nice.
Which is
Nice problem to
nice.
have.
So it's like I'm very comfortable being that way. But it had made it harder for people to find me, but it was all by word of mouth. But certainly now with social media, it's not hard. So just
Right.
Google my name or write me at billattride@gmail.com, and you'll get me.
Well, and I can only send the most positive encouragement to people to actually check you out because, as I've sort of talked about in this interview, that the reading was really powerful for me and goes beyond just that like horoscope, what's in the magazine type of astrology, the entertainment version. It's actually quite nourishing and fulfilling, and it helped me understand myself in a much greater way. My partner's also had a reading with you. Several friends have had readings with you, and everybody has left having such an amazing experience. So I absolutely recommend people check you out and continue the word of mouth spreading of Bill Attride and his wisdom.
Well, thank you, Travis. That was great. Thank you.
Yeah. And if you want to get in contact with me, you can reach me on my Instagram at Travers03. You can email me directly at travisstock03@gmail.com, or you can go to my website at travisstock.com. I'm also on Patreon. If you are enjoying the conversations held on the New Masculine and you're interested in helping to support this movement and this what I'm creating here with this podcast, please consider becoming a contributor to the Patreon. That's at patreon.com/thenewmasculine. Thanks everyone for listening, and thank you, Bill, for participating in this conversation and giving such a different perspective to what we were already talking about on this podcast. It's been a real pleasure.